Welcome to SolarWinds Lab. I'm Kong Yang.
I'm Patrick Hubbard.
And I'm Chris Groot.
Welcome, Chris. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about how to keep your company safe with the ARRR Pillars. R as in availability, reliability, resiliency, and recoverability.
And it is great to have you with us, Chris. I've been trying to get you on Lab for a long time. I'm convinced that we can get you on Thwack Camp this year. Yeah, stay tuned for that. But Chris, you're an expert in backup and recovery. You've been doing this for a really long time.
I have, yeah. So my role here is product management with SolarWinds Backup, and it's great that we're talking about this subject because it's backup is the end, the last stop on the train when all else goes wrong. So happy to participate today.
Perfect. It is a key piece of keeping your company safe. But Patrick, we were discussing keeping your company safe and all the connotations with that.
Yeah, well, I think we tend to get preoccupied with the perimeter, right? With the firewall, or maybe we're doing regulatory compliance or something else where we think about safe in terms of what the legal team would care about. Are we safe? But if you think about what we're really trying to do, what all of us in IT are trying to do is actually keep our businesses safe, right? Beyond that, it's like, can we continue to transact business in the event of a failure? Not just something goes down, but let's say we've lost a critical server. Can we restore that? So it's that balance between sort of the careful safety assurance processes that we put in place for IT at the beginning versus the ones about like recoverability SLAs. Like, how long will it take us to actually do a restore? Are we testing restores? Are we keeping track of all of our logging? Do we have what we need to be able to fix problems and keep the business running and safe, not just do we have a safe security posture?
And that's perfect because there's so many definitions out there for availability, reliability, resiliency, and recoverability. So let's go ahead and define some of those. So availability, Chris.
It comes down to uptime. So making sure that the transactions of the business can continue to flow, because there's risk if those transactions stopped. It means that you are either not making money or you're spending a lot more money than you need to. And we've seen many examples like that, like at the airport. When an airline goes down, if people are lined up and they start having to do paper transactions, that's where a lot more money is being spent.
Although you could argue that debate that we get into all the time about the difference between sort of availability and resiliency, right? You can definitely say our TPF facility that's getting people on and off planes is down and we've gone to using paper. But if the business is still getting people on planes, and it's a horrible example and I certainly would never want to be there in the knock when this actually happened.
Me neither.
But if I can at least continue to limp forward and keep the business running and then create enough air cover to go back and actually remediate the problem and then restore my systems to actually get automation working again, that's still something that we should be thinking about. And that is safety. That is the difference between running in a degraded state, but keeping the business moving forward versus actually being hard down.
Exactly. You mentioned uptime, you mentioned resiliency in there, and also business needs in there. Availability, most of you guys know that as nines of availability, right? The uptime of your system, of your application and so forth. Resiliency, how well do you handle those threats and those mitigate those failures and still stay up in there. And then reliability, how well do you handle those,
right.
Stay resilient to it while you scale to the resources that you need while meeting those SLAs into there. But as you walk that path of availability, reliability, resiliency, you get into a space where if a disaster or a failure comes,
right.
That recoverability piece is also key, being able to get to a good known state.
Absolutely, and understanding what steps are in place to get you there, what the business can withstand while it's down in terms of how long can you be down for, and how much can you afford to lose?
Well, and that's an interesting point. The word you lose there when it comes to budget, right? I think we've been trained over decades to focus on availability. How many nines do we have? But nines are expensive. I mean, every time you add another one, it's almost exponentially more expensive. You're getting into a lot of complex clustering and horizontal scale and load balance, and then versus being able to assure that your business is resilient, which in a lot of cases is less expensive. If it's the difference between, that we've given them that metric, right, that says, I want you to set my bonus based on an SLA of nines availability versus what the business actually cares about, which is can you assure me that we're not going to lose transactional data? Right? Can you promise me that in the event of a significant failure, we can be back online in 2 minutes? Because then they can assess the real business cost of that failure. And a lot of times that's something that's way more valuable to the business. And for us as IT professionals, in a lot of cases, it's less expensive to deliver a resilient infrastructure than it is to focus on lots and lots of nines of availability.
And that's perfect. That's perfect in keeping with our theme of keeping your company safe or keeping your business safe with leveraging the ARRR Pillars. And to do so, we have, like you mentioned, a jam-packed session in there. So first segment, we're gonna have fellow head geek Leon Adato and Kevin Sparenberg, KM Sigma, join us, and they're gonna show you how to handle change management via reports and analytics in Patch Manager.
You're bringing the super group.
Yes.
All right.
Then you and I are going to turn something that's ephemeral into something that's more persistent?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a debate about opinion versus truth.
Truth or dare in the cloud is what I heard. And lastly, we're going to recover with best practices, disaster recovery, and backup.
Yeah, so we'll be coming through with myself and Carrie Reber, and I believe Patrick, you'll be joining us.
Yeah, well, you know, I just love talking about backup. But actually, one of the things that's interesting about this episode, and Kong is famous for this. I'm sure you guys have figured out by now that we actually sort of take turn writing episodes. Kong's episodes in particular come from works on blogs and ebooks and other content that he does. And yours tends to be applicable regardless of the tools and technologies that you use. So one of the things that we're hoping that you get out of this episode is, I mean, obviously many of you are SolarWinds customers, but these approaches should apply regardless of the technology that you're using, and it's going to be really interesting.
Absolutely. What we aim to do is have you continue to develop and hone your foundational skills like monitoring with discipline, or as my fellow head geek Leon says, monitoring as a discipline, the DART and SOAR frameworks, right? So you can take these lessons that are going to be shared, leverage the ARRR Pillars across any tech construct, any project in IT or DevOps that you have coming up this year and be successful.
You know, we ought to include a link in the details below so that you guys can check out the DART SOAR framework. All right, so we're going to start with Leon and Mr. Sparenberg, right? All right, ready? Watch this.
Hi everyone, we have back on the SolarWinds set Kevin Sparenberg. He is one of our product marketing managers for the network monitoring pillar of tools. Welcome back.
Thanks, I actually like being here. It's a lot of fun.
It's always fun to have you. So in this segment we're going to talk about patching, but what struck me when we first talked about this topic was that it strikes me as basic blocking and tackling, right? I mean, like, doesn't everyone have a patching solution in place already?
Well, yes and no. I mean, most operating systems, specifically Windows, ship with one. They've got, you know, the Windows system updates that are just there. You just go, yeah, check,
right,
install. And people think that's enough. And if you're running a pure Microsoft shop, no third party, there's an argument to be made, but I still don't think it's going to cover everything.
No, I think that, first of all, we're going to ignore the desktop environment for just a second, and we're just going to talk about the server environment. That's what we're focusing on. But even within the server environment, relying on your server teams to approve, accept, understand those updates without any sort of centralized review is, I think, a dangerous proposition.
Oh, it's extremely dangerous. Not to mention, if you have to worry about falling outside of change windows. You have to make sure that systems are down on a scheduled basis, that this kind of patching takes place that's actually in line with your organization.
Right, so yeah, uncontrolled, unapproved, untested change, probably not the best idea. But Microsoft solved that.
Yes.
There's WSUS.
Yes. So Windows System Update Services is a free tool that's available as a Windows feature. All you do is, in anything from Windows 2008 and later, just turn it on the feature and it says, okay, well, we're ready to basically pull down, cache these things for you. You'll have control of sending them out, and then you can send them out to your local Windows servers.
Right, and it's, the price is right. It's
yes,
free.
Free is good.
It's scalable.
Very, very scalable.
For free. Unless you have, I will say, well, if you have a larger environment, you may need a SQL Server backend just to manage the data, but otherwise, pretty free. So again, why are we here? What are we talking about?
Well, we mentioned earlier that it's kind of for the Microsoft-only house. If you're literally running Windows and you have only Exchange on it, and you have only SQL Server, and you have only these things, and you run nothing else outside the Microsoft kind of umbrella.
You mean those imaginary companies?
Yes, yes, the imaginary companies. So, but a lot of servers these days, if they're running Java, they're probably running a slightly dated version of Java as part of the wrapper for an application that's installed in there. If they're running any type of utility,
Acrobat, like any of those tools that are not Microsoft, WSUS is apparently not going to help out.
Well, again, yes and no. Here's the thing. Microsoft doesn't actually publish that catalog. They're not going to keep a catalog for third-party tools. I mean, that's not their shtick. They're Microsoft. They're worried about Windows and their operating systems. However, we can actually leverage that WSUS infrastructure because it's already built and actually works excessively well. So if you'll actually be out there and have a machine where you actually publish a patch and you say, this is now approved for distribution, you can actually have that scale way out globally.
Right.
So you can actually have that level of control. Now, all we do is we take that and we kind of say, hey, how about this other patch that's not a Microsoft one?
Right, and there's a few other things that WSUS doesn't quite fill the gap for. You don't get a solid inventory system, like a complete catalog of systems that you're, and you get some status, but not enough. So there's really a gap to be filled, which takes us to Patch Manager. So Patch Manager gives us what we just talked about, inventory. It gives us a sense of what patches have been pushed out to machine, whether they're successful or not. Right? What else? What else does Patch Manager offer?
It has a ton of reporting. It has scheduling. It has the third-party package list, which is the big one for me. So if you actually work with Adobe and Java seem to be the two big ones that come on top. So if you actually work with them and they need to be pushed out, whether it's to servers because you've got some type of VDI infrastructure or you're working with something else, but they need to go out to those, we'll actually capture that, wrap it, and send it out. So the regular Windows update process can do it, but we'll actually control the scheduling.
Right. The phrase to keep in mind is pre-built and pre-tested.
Yeah.
So that's part of what you're getting with the Patch Manager system. But more than that, I think there's also a reality about life in corporate IT, which is, I mean, we've been talking so far about how do I get all the latest patches out, but that's not always the case. There are situations where you don't want the latest patch to go out. You've got a system that needs to be held back. So now you have this weird issue where to maintain auditory compliance, you have to patch it, but you have a business-based reason not to
patch it. Yep.
And that puts you in sort of a jeopardy situation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So more than that, I think that Patch Manager also offers you the idea that if the patch went bad, do you have the information about what went wrong? Can you retry it?
Yep.
You have those kinds of things. You've got a persistent diary of your systems and where they are at any given point in time. And when we talk about the ARRR Framework, our framework, you want to have that record of, where my environment is at. You want to have that availability, because if I have, and the other piece is that Patch Manager gives you is rather than creating a list of exceptional systems or accepted systems, I'm not going to use these, you don't have to keep a list and wonder what's going on with the list. Instead, what you've got is rules. If it's running Windows 2012 Core and it has .NET 3.5 and it's got a directory called ABC123 Company Inventory Program, then we're not going to push the 351 .NET
Service
patch.
pack, yep.
Right. Now you're not managing a list of systems, you're managing rules. And rules, which can then enumerate to which systems right now fit that rule set, now you can address them on an ongoing basis. I think you were saying compliance is not everything is up to the latest date.
No, compliance is all about making sure things that are up to date can be up to date, and the things that can't because they're going to impact your business need is having really good documentation about the why and the when we're going to try to get it up to there and what our blockers are.
Right, so compliance is just basically note-taking compulsively. So that's, I think, enough talking. I really want to get our hands into the system. So we're going to take a look at Patch Manager. Full disclosure, this is not a deep dive into Patch Manager. We have other lab sessions to work with that. However, we want to just do a quick overview. So over here in our system, first of all, we have some machines. You can see that we've got a few different machines. Not a lot, it's a lab.
It's a lab, yeah.
But you can see that we have the machines. We have a package we're going to push to. In this case, I think we're going to use Notepad++. Again, this might be more of your desktop environment, but it doesn't matter. And the point I want to make here is that you can use your patching system not just for updates or security fixes or whatever, but also to push out whole software. Say any one of the 37 free tools that SolarWinds has.
Yeah.
Shameless plug. So in this case, we're going to use Notepad. So talk us through this. How do I get this out onto a system?
Okay, so there's a couple steps here. The first thing is to identify the specific packages you want. Now, these packages synchronize in, like you said, automatically tested, they're pre-tested, and they're ready with all the rules wrapping them. So all you really have to do is select which one you want to use. In this case, we'll actually use the most recent. So we'll go down to the bottom, which is not going to work. So we'll resort it. And then we'll go to the bottom. So here's 754. So we got 754 here, and all we have to do is say, okay, well, I want to either upgrade systems that already have it on there. There's a specific rule in here as part of the prereq rules that determines whether or not it's already installed. If it is installed, then we'll upgrade. If it's not installed, this is not going to push it. That's what this one is for. So you can actually, let's say we need it everywhere. And like these are Windows servers that I'm worried about sending it to. So I actually like this on there. So I'm going to go ahead and publish the contents.
Okay, so that one's been pushed and published. What's next?
Okay, so that's out there on the server, but we don't actually have any approval set up. So it's basically just going to sit there and collect dust. So what we'll do is we'll come into third-party updates, and then we will actually find it. Here it is already. We can say, oh, I want to approve this. In my case, I want to approve for install everywhere. So all I have to do is select all computers, approve it for install, which this one's already done. You can see here it's already been approved. I did this a little earlier to kind of help. And then approve it.
Okay, so we've pushed out a package. Again, not a deep dive into the mechanics of it.
No.
But the real power, and especially as it relates to the ARRR framework, is knowing what happened and what didn't happen. So really, where I want to go next is how can I know the health of my environment? So the first place I want to go is back to all the computers where you might have missed it, but here I can see some really interesting information. I can see the, not just the operating system, but I can see the disposition of the machine. Is it considered a workstation or a server? I can also see on this machine, 1 update is installed, there's 6 that are not installed, 3 are actually pending in a pending status. So you can see in any given, for any given system, what's waiting, what's going on with it. I think that's important. But there's other reports also. So over here on the side, we have really interesting reporting. One of the ones I want to highlight is the analytics. If I run this approved updates, just right-click and run the report. So here, what I got from clicking on each machine individually, now I can see for the entire environment, right? I can see how many have been approved but not installed, how many systems were approved unsuccessfully, downloaded and failed, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got those kinds of things for the entire environment. Another report that I want to take a look at is under task history, just different category, the published updates. So once again, here I can see which patches were pushed out to which machines, whether they failed or succeeded. And when you're talking about the reliability and accounting of your environment, that's what you need on an enterprise basis. That's what it brings. That's what it brings to the table. So I think that from a concept of ARRR, patching is that basic blocking and tackling, but how you get there is up to you. And I believe that the level of rigor and the level of reliability that you have in terms of knowing where your environment is at depends on having sort of robust tools that will get you there. Right?
And that's the case for everyone. So just make sure that you've got separate groups for your servers. You've got them for your workstations. I mean, mostly we're kind of gearing towards servers, but one thing I like about our solution for this and having this real nice kind of reporting engine is what happens if you're running Windows Core? Windows Core has no UI. It's kind of a little difficult to tell whether or not your updates are going cleanly. We'll actually be able to report that stuff back.
Right. All right. Well, as always, thank you for joining us.
Oh, no. It's a pleasure being here.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
ARRR, there be logs, matey. Come on, I'm just trying to keep, with the theme of today's episode. No, but seriously, how many times have you, and I know you guys certainly have, had a problem that you're trying to troubleshoot that if you do not have the detailed logs, the actual logs of the transactions that happen, it is impossible to troubleshoot? I mean,
all the time.
Right, it's really bad. There are some things that make it a little bit easier for us. I think certainly if you're using like virtualization, the platform offers something.
That's true. The platforms like VMware vSphere, Microsoft Hyper-V, they aggregate all those logs for you.
Right, but especially now with like Kubernetes and Docker and even maybe a custom application that your BizDev team created, right, that's doing like API access against Salesforce, those things are all creating logs all over the place. And if you don't grab them, if you let them be ephemeral and disappear, you're not going to be able to go back and fix things, especially when things are hard down.
So you're talking about the hybrid IT case, right? Are we talking Loggly?
Well, I'm going to use Loggly and Papertrail to sort of show that roll-up of once it's all aggregated. But the thing about this, and you guys tell us all the time, is that the real challenge seems to be how do you get past that first mile? Like how do you actually configure Docker or a Linux server or CloudWatch to be able to send that data and get it where you can do something with it, regardless of the product that you're using? So I want to show them that.
Yeah, or how do you get developers to start thinking about logging before they develop their application?
Putting logging in at the beginning of the application. Kong, you devil, you. Yes, next thing you know, you're going to be talking about putting in security at the beginning.
You know that ain't happening, brother.
All right, so let's do this. Let's do Docker. We'll do Linux journal D. I'll show you how to set those up pretty quickly, and then we'll do the AWS CloudWatch as an example, and we'll just do like 2 or 3 minutes on this, get you guys started, and start thinking about how to do this. Yeah?
Awesome.
All right, let's look. Okay, so we're looking at Linux here. This is Docker running on a Raspberry Pi back at my house, but pay no attention to that. And I want to actually, look at logs, like the native Docker logs. We'll start with that, and then how to get it out.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so the first step is, how do you normally get logs, right? You're going to do Docker PSA, give us a list of the running Docker instances. And then I would typically do Docker logs and the container ID, and that's actually going to spit out the logs for that instance. But what I want to really do is be able to do something a little bit better and aggregate those logs. And you'll notice I just did Docker logs right here, and it says that the Docker does not support reading. Why does it not support reading?
Why doesn't it support
Because I'm
reading?
already redirecting those into my journal D using my syslog driver. So just by default, I'm doing it that way. And the way that we're going to do that is take a look at the daemon configuration for Docker itself, right? Now,
Okay.
normally by default, we'd have log driver syslog, or a lot of times this file won't even be there. So the first thing I did was I go ahead and created this JSON file, and I said log driver is journal D. So basically anything that would normally be going to standard out or standard error is now going to be piped to my regular syslog, syslog D daemon, and it's going to go into the journal. Okay, so now I've got centralized logging for Docker.
Yes.
Next, how do I get my centralized logging for my Linux instance out? So for that, we're going to take a look at the journal D config.
Okay.
And if we scroll down here, you will see forward to syslog yes. Normally that's just, it's already set to yes, but it's just commented out. So I'm going to just remove the comment and then restart my journal D service. And then the last thing that we're going to do, so that is now forwarding from aggregated logs from Docker into journal D. Now we're going to send that to our syslog. So we're going to take a look at our syslog config. And if we scroll through here, you'll notice that this one is set up pretty much by default, right? It's telling me the type of logs that I'm willing to receive that are a part of our syslog. It's going to, a little bit about catch-all and sort of where those are being cached and how they're being sent out. So then how am I getting it out? In this case, I'm using Loggly as my aggregation service. So how do I finally get that out? Yeah, pretty easy. We're going to go over here to, let's see, our syslog D, and if we take a look at our files in here, you'll see, oh, look at that. There's a paper trail and a Loggly config. So we're going to cat our Loggly config, and this is the config that's actually set up by the Loggly script. Now I did it by hand, but you can use the script to set it up instead. And what this thing is going to do is just tell me a couple of things. Right? The first thing is sort of where that spool is, the amount of file space that I want it to have. But the main thing that I want you to look at here is the default NetStream driver CAF file. This is really, really important. A lot of times when we do logging, especially over the internet and with aggregation, it's really easy to just do UDP syslog out, no problem. But especially as you aggregate logs and you're getting more and more information into smaller and smaller conduits, the chances of somebody being able to sit there in the middle and sniff that off and accidentally there's a password or some other critical data that's a part of one of those log messages being exposed gets higher. So make sure that you are using TLS as a part of that. So that basically defines the TLS. And the next thing down here is the template that defines the format that Loggly expects. It's doing a little bit of remapping for proc ID and app name and that sort of thing. And then down here, the last declaration is the action to just forward it using TLS and that certificate out to Loggly, and it's sending it out on a particular port and to a destination.
Patrick, you've shown us how to modify the config files, a lot of CLI commands. To me, this smells, you can automate this, you can script it to
Absolutely. You would typically do this with a script. That is exactly right. And especially like you might want to embed it into a Docker container itself, right? So you don't have to worry about this. So is it running in Kubernetes? Is it running in Docker Swarm? Is it part of a container service running in AWS? You don't care because the configuration is actually baked in. So no matter where it runs, you're going to get that data. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here we'll do it in Papertrail first because it comes up a little bit more immediately in Papertrail because it's really designed for trailing, right? That's what it does. So I'm going to come back over here and we'll just, for grins, say logger, hey there from Pi. I'll come back over here and look at that, hey there from Pi. But there's also some other things that are going on here. You can see that there's some messages here that are talking about not being able to update a registry for a particular host that's running in Docker, right? That's something else that's going on. Now, I could certainly query through this here, but the main thing is, remember, I'm aggregating all of those Docker messages. So I'm going to come back over here to Loggly and look at the same data that we were looking at before. Now, these are all the same events. They're just parsed out sort of raw. But what I've done is gone in and done a couple of other little pieces of analysis, right? So the first one is, if I look at this from the syslog perspective, I might want to break this down by host, right? So I've got a couple of them. I've got the Pilot itself and a couple of other ones that are sending it. But you'll notice this one right here, right? It's parsing this out for me, and it's, let me break this out here so you can see this a little bit better. So this one is, it's telling me that it can't authorize to a Docker Hub post, right? Okay, that's helpful, but how many times is that failing, right? In this case, it's Watchtower running, and it basically can automatically pull down new versions of an instance and add it. Well, I think what's better is actually to look at this more from a dashboard perspective, right? Because if you're aggregating all of those logs, go ahead and pull those together in a dashboard. So what I've done here is just taken what were charts that were coming from the events and including the data that was in that, and just set up a couple of little rules. Like one of them is this container restart failure, and that's telling me that on a particular interval, I'm failing that restart. That is something that I didn't know until I had all the logs in one place.
In signal processing, that's filtering the noise out.
That's exactly it. And doing, or like down here, for example, here I'm looking at sync analysis. Apparently it says sunk analogies, but these are sync analogies, right? So this is telling me where I'm either getting a whole lot more events than I expect or less. And then I'm going to be able to drill in and figure out what those are. So for example, here's a list of the messages by application. So this is telling me like sort of application density. And again, that was just something I did as a chart. And I said, hey, let's save that over a dashboard. I can look at my total number of events. Here's how many times we sudo. This is when I just did the quick sudo over so that I could change directories and pull that Docker config. Here's my new sessions by host down here as well. And again, if I didn't have all of this data in one place, I wouldn't be able to sort of figure this out after the fact, right? I've got to capture it then.
Yep, you are observing your cluster because you want to maintain control of it. Observability and controllability for the win.
That's right. Okay, so one more quick thing. Over here, you'll see this, this panel in my dashboard, which is inbound calls. Now, I get a lot of spam calls. I know you guys do at home, right? So one of the things that I was thinking about was if I only could analyze some data that was coming back as a part of the JSON package that's coming out of, this case, Twilio that's running in AWS, I could actually chart bogus calls against legitimate calls that are coming in on that interface. Now, in this example, it's phone calls, right? But normally this would be a business value that you would care about, right? Where it's embedded in a log, it's JSON that's sort of gone and forgotten, but you'd like to be able to pull it up. Well, the nice thing is being able to just start that with a search and do exploration and then save that. And the way that I did that was there's a piece of data that I'm looking for here. There's a JSON message that comes back. So I'm looking for a Twilio request. I want the direction to be inbound, and I want the call status to be ringing, right? So I'm going to just search for that. There haven't been any in the last 10 minutes, so we're going to go back here and say the last 2 days. Aha! So then these are the parsed out messages. I'm going to have to blur this out because I just gave away my home phone number. But like even here, this Nomo Robo span score is the thing that's coming back and telling me whether it's a bogus call or not, right? Now, what does this have to do with resiliency?
Yeah, especially for business continuity that we were talking about.
Do any of them, do you think, have IVR systems, inbound systems to their businesses with customers that actually care about whether the calls get through?
Perhaps.
Right. So when there's a problem with the IVR, there's a log somewhere. It's going to be a configuration issue most likely, or it may be a service provider problem. But this is not bandwidth. This is not an interface. This is something at the application layer. And being able to capture that in a remote place and then surface it so that you can go find it is the way that you can get back online quickly. So if you think about one of the things that you're actually doing by providing really rich logging is it's almost insurance against not being able to solve something quickly, right? It makes you feel better because you know we get accused of hoarding logs all the time, right?
That's
but
right.
If you know you're collecting it, if you can go to management and say, not only do I have something to analyze my logs, I mean, if you want to use Elasticsearch, you can do that. But it's like, the main thing is I took the time to export those, to actually make sure that those are all aggregated in one place. You can sleep better because there's nothing that you won't know, and it's truth. It's not just an opinion based on polling an interface. It is the truth of what's actually happening. A single bad call, single angry customer, there's going to be a record of it somewhere.
I think I'm starting to see some of the truth from the opinions because you're taking something that's cloudy, ephemeral, and you're making it persistent.
I'm persisting it.
And not only that, but you're surfacing the single point of truth because now you know exactly what happened, why it happened, and you are now more resilient because now you can defend against that.
That's right. I can get metrics and I can troubleshoot if I just take the time to set it up.
Our pillars at work: availability, reliability, resiliency, and recoverability with logs.
All right, so we're going to take a minute and talk about backup. And I know I make fun of backup a lot, but it is really a critical component of ARRR to be able to make sure that you can recover critical assets for your business. And joining us is Carrie Reber.
VM Carrie on Twitter.
That's right. And you're
Chris Groot, at Chris Groot on Twitter.
yeah, so be sure to hit him up online. But Carrie, you're joining us also. You're part of the product team for backup.
I've worked for a few backup companies over the years, and I'm happy to be part of the product team here at SolarWinds.
Awesome. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, the first we're going to talk about is some best practices and principles that you should be aware of for your backup policy.
Like the 3-2-1 principle.
That's the one. So 3 copies of your data, 2 different media, and 1 offsite.
When you say offsite, a lot of times people think about the cloud, of course, but that can be good and bad.
Right.
There's a lot of concerns around data locality.
Where is your data?
Yeah, where is your data?
Do you
Who's
have
got it? Who
GDPR
has
concerns?
control?
Right.
Exactly.
Can anyone see my data?
Yes.
So that's something to definitely ask vendors about where they're storing
Absolutely.
offsite.
Yeah, understanding that the data needs to be encrypted before it leaves production devices, when it's in transit or going over the internet, where it's located, that it's encrypted there, and that you control the keys.
Absolutely.
And then the second piece is around the compliance piece. So things like data sovereignty are super important to companies these days, knowing that if they're located in the UK, even different offices for one particular company that may be working globally, knowing that, let's say they run in the UK, or that they've got an office in the UK, that the data stays in the UK.
Absolutely.
So things of that detail are really important to be asking with that one of the 3-2-1.
We also hear a lot of talk about RPO and RTO, those acronyms.
Yes,
talk
do you know
us
what
through
those
those?
stand for, Patrick?
Why don't you refresh my memory?
That's recovery point objective, and so that's how much data you can afford to lose, and the recovery time objective. So once you do have an outage or an interruption, how long you're going to be down for.
But wouldn't you say those are more SLAs that are actually that the business cares about rather than a traditional sort of availability or timeout or some other reachability number that we sort of tend to internally talk about?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the business conversation that you can discuss with people, like what can we truly afford in terms of downtime.
Because you're talking about risk,
That's
not
right.
just some arbitrary number.
Right.
And it's important, too, to remember that not all disasters are big disasters. People often think, oh, a meteor hits the data center, you've lost everything, and that's what they may think they need to be prepared for. But far more common are those small disasters,
Right.
where perhaps an executive accidentally deleted a file that they need for the board meeting.
Yeah.
That suddenly becomes a really high priority.
Well, it's a high priority, and it's really, I mean, it is important to the business. Don't let me say that not being prepared for a board meeting is not. But to that perspective is that we spend so much time being driven by little things that really, I know it's critical from that one perspective, but that's just one file that's being recovered, or maybe it's a single file on a single workstation, or a config file for a server. It's important. But for you to be able to be productive managing all of the other things that you have to do in IT, it can be an enormous distraction.
So you have to keep it simple.
Yep, keep it simple. There's a couple of elements to that. One is, first of all, standardizing your rollout. So understanding that you've got policies across different devices, and how your servers and your workstations are being protected from that perspective.
So you're talking about being able to assign profiles to groups of devices.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so when you have different workloads with different needs, some devices need to be backed up once a day, some devices need to be backed up once an hour. So being able to specify with every single device exactly how they should be handled, how often the schedules, or how often it needs to be protected, how often a cycle needs to run. And then another aspect to understanding or having good protection is from a recovery perspective. It's great to have that copy off-site, but a lot of cases, a lot of IT admins need faster RTO, and one of those ways you can do that is to also keep a copy local.
Or just sleep better knowing that you've got a physical copy of
That's
your own
true
data.
too. That's true too. And so, in terms of that, being able to have a local copy and to be able to make it very easy to store that and keep it in sync with what's also being backed up to the cloud.
Right. So the recommendation is get started quickly by making a backup off-site, and then follow on is go ahead and create a local backup copy as well.
Yeah, it's time to value.
Yeah, and if you use a service, it's really fast. Because traditional backup software that's been around forever, you download a piece of software, you install it on local server, then you have to identify the storage that's going to be your backup targets. You have to provision that storage. You have to configure it and set it all up. If you want an offsite copy, in some cases, you have to separately get an arrangement with a cloud provider and configure all of that. It can take a long time, but if you have a cloud-first service, you get a lot of quick time to value.
So that meets that 2 in 3-2-1. So that gets you an offsite copy and a local copy without doing sneakernet.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it really is that time to value that is really important. We had a funny story in here just last week where I was discussing with internal IT, and they were going to actually wait for, I think, 3 weeks to get local storage for this local copy.
It kills a lot of backup projects. You get hung up waiting for that local copy backup.
And I said, guys, let's do it today. And literally the next day, they were rolled out and everything was protected as planned. Now, when that hardware does come in, they are going to connect it up and it'll sync itself back from the cloud. So we will get that protection, but it's still better to have one copy. The only thing better than one backup is having 2 backups, right? And that's really where we'll be in a couple weeks.
Well, but the other thing about using a profile is not every piece of data has the same criticality. Maybe maybe your time for backup and recovery can be different, and so it also lets you, based on the profile, decide the speed of that storage for that backup. So you can actually have tiered backup performance based on the types of data that you're backing up.
Yeah, you can even have granularity in terms of file types. If you decide MP3 files are not something we want to protect, you can make that choice.
Awesome.
So once you've got your profiles rolled out, the second piece of keeping it simple is then managing by exceptions. So as long as green is good, you don't have to spend an ounce of time on something.
Okay.
But
because people are busy. I don't know too many people. I mean, a large organization, maybe they have a dedicated backup person, but most companies, I think you're wearing lots of hats. You don't have time.
Right. You're basically talking about 2 different views, right? So one of them is breadth of my backup, so an exception which systems are not being backed up, and then the other exception is backups that are not successful, or they're slow, or they're not meeting their SLAs.
Right. So to manage those exceptions, one of the things you really want to look for is the ability to filter down to find where there might be an issue.
Got it.
So we can see from many devices down to a few, and you can see by clicking on a particular device exactly where that issue was. So if it's only one file out of 309,000, that's probably just fine because it backed up the day before, or you can back it up next hour. Or if you really want, you can actually open up that particular agent from that particular device and just run a backup in real time.
Okay, so now you just connected to the agent. So this is something that I install a server and then distribute agents, or how does this work?
So the management layer is hosted.
Okay, so
all your reporting.
So all the reporting, central dashboards, everything else, that's a SaaS. That's a web-based tool, and then the only thing you're deploying here is agents.
Correct.
Are you pushing the agents, or it's part of group policy, or how are you getting the agents out?
Well, you can choose how you want to do it. So you can do like the manual installation one by one.
No, we don't want to do that.
No, we don't. Or the preferred would be to do automated deployment. So you can do it through Active Directory group policy. You can do it through, it's scripted. So whatever your favorite software deployment method is, you can bring that up and be provided with that script. And so it's very, very easy to deploy via PowerShell.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you were showing just a second ago the view from the agent. So that view, you basically are logged into the console, and when you need to get to a specific machine, it's actually going to proxy that through for you.
That's right.
Okay.
So if you're on that local machine, you can pull up locally. But if you're operating from the console and working with someone who's not sitting, if you're not sitting right beside that machine,
you can be on the local machine so that if, for example, you had a local copy and the network was down, you could still do a recovery?
What do you know?
Oh my gosh.
And if it's after hours and you're at your kid's soccer game and you need to do a recovery, could you even do it from there?
Awesome.
Yep, you can do it from any type of device. So the restore is very simple. Just to get into a particular date, you want to be able to drill down into any particular detail and run that restore. It's just got to be that easy. So when that phone call comes, it's a 30-second task, and you can go back. So managing exceptions is part one, so you know exactly where the problems are, to delineate them and make sure that they're corrected. Second thing is dealing with recovery, knowing how quickly you can get files back.
Got it.
And the third piece and last piece that we'll talk about today is testing.
Always important.
So testing.
Often overlooked.
Often overlooked. You're exactly right. And so understanding that you can actually take devices and test that recovery in a non-intrusive or non-interruptive way to actually be able to create a standby copy of an entire physical or virtual machine in another virtual environment, or even like in Azure or something, just for testing purposes. Having that available and being able to verify that those servers will actually boot up is an important piece of the equation as well.
Well, and it's interesting because I like to sort of make the joke that this is continuous recovery delivery, right? Because in a CI/CD environment, one of the things that you would be doing is post-deployment test, right? So you would automatically make sure that that service came up and that it ran the way it was expected. You'd be testing it at build, you'd be testing it at pre-deploy, you'd go live with it and test it again. So if you are not, and I make the joke over and over again, that if you are not testing your recoveries, you do not have backup. So to be able to automatically make sure that you have a post-recovery test that runs takes a lot of that risk away, and it also lets you just walk away from the system and let it do what it does and focus on something else.
Absolutely. So knowing that you've got devices where that's required and other devices where that's not required, and you can apply the appropriate policy, know that the backups are successful, and know that when it comes time, when that phone call comes, which ultimately it will come someday.
Right. Or it'll be an exception report that pops up.
Yes.
Yep.
Knowing that you're ready and that you're going to deliver, cash in the insurance at that time is really how you tie this whole thing together.
Well, do you find that it also helps people get past that sort of first step of the backup where they'll say, yeah, I'm getting a backup, but I haven't tested recovery because I literally cannot set a maintenance window where I'm going to test this on the actual hardware. Being able to, do you find that people will do a recovery test on another machine or maybe in a VM to make sure that it's working before they do the actual full up production test?
Absolutely. Like you can get it 90% of the way there, which you've de-risked most of what you're dealing with at that point. And then you can save that last 10% for a very special time where you've got the weekend to work. Right. So with that, I think we've really covered off the best principles to sort of wrap it up. We talked about the 3-2-1. We talked about setting expectations with the RPO and RTO. Keeping it simple with policies, managing by exceptions, and then finally how to recover to make sure you can do that quickly in the case of the interruptive file loss, database losses, or the operating system still running, and being able to test full system recovery for when that really bad thing ultimately happens to you.
So you can sleep at night with less cost, less complexity.
Hey, they're back! Here we are.
Howdy, folks.
And I know I do tend to take liberties talking about backup,
yes,
but really, recovery is really, really important because that's what allows me to do creative things with data and not worry about blowing it up.
That's great.
But it's cloudy, and we persisted. We dared to persist.
We did talk about logging a little bit. I think we're still going to debate the difference between opinion and truth. But yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that I think we tend to forget about, sort of that first mile of how do I make sure that I'm persisting in my log data so that I can look at it later or get metrics off of it when so much of it is increasingly generated little bits here and little bits there, not just in the cloud, but actually even on premises with distributed applications.
Right, and when you talk about that first mile, that pre-mile is the foundation, knowing that the systems that you've got are stable and reliable, and that takes us back to the patching piece. Not just the emergency patching, you've got Spectre and Meltdown and things like that, not just those, but just knowing that your entire environment is in compliance with what the organization feels is necessary, whether it's internal applications or the external regular systems, operating systems patches, but you have the trust that everything is what you think it is and you can find those outliers and deal with them.
Improving reliability by applying a little bit of forethought ahead of time to assure it in the first place.
Exactly.
And that's how you keep your company safe, leveraging the ARRR pillars, right? Availability, reliability, resiliency, and recoverability, and we covered it well in this episode.
I think so. And of course, you're famous for adding a million fantastic links below this episode. So you're going to include some more specifically coming out of AWS, right?
Yes, absolutely. We'll have a link to AWS's well-architected white paper, as well as Microsoft Azure's reference architectures and NIST framework on risk management, as well as cybersecurity.
Awesome. I think we got it?
I think so.
Absolutely. For SolarWinds Lab, I'm Kong Yang.
I'm Patrick Hubbard.
I'm Chris Groot.
I'm Carrie Reber.
And I'm Leon Adato. Thanks for watching.